So I produced a small piece on my Substack account called Genocidal Contradiction after having completed the Butterfield tract. It's a very short book on the so-called quote-unquote Whig history, which is a term which is basically in fashionable discussion, let's say academic discussion, it's used to mean something like teleological, the forbidden teleological history, or optimism, or something like that. But I believe the problem that Butterfield is raising is synonymous in some way with, at least in some modest way, with the modern development insofar as the profession of the historian came into existence in the 19th century. In connection to the problem of the ancients and the moderns, we can think about this, and I raise this as a question for people to make further research on. Since professional training is a necessity rather than something super added, and since the ancient low opinion of labor is based on the despising of mere necessity, which obviates or blocks that which is more than necessary, which traditionally was thought of as higher than the necessary, but in Heidegger it's ambiguous which direction we're going in. Heidegger supposed Nietzsche in that sense. What would be higher than the necessary would be the unlocking of the rational essence of the human being, understood as the rational animal. And this unlocking of that essence could only come when all menial tasks are set aside in the position that was secured. For instance, Plato and Aristotle both mentioned the Hierophants in Egypt as developing early Sibyl mathematics under this dispensation where they didn't have to worry about food, housing, etc., etc. The lower parts of the Maslow hierarchy, as now appears in the terms of the, let's say, the the London Financial Times, let's say. So when history becomes a question of securing these basic needs, which are needs rather than something super added to the needs or higher than the needs, what does that mean for history? So we have, in history, we have this double branch. History means originally historia, which is investigation, which is going out and looking at like what a birder did in the 19th century, or still today, I suppose, taking photographs, reporting into the National Geographic or whatever the earlier authority was, or to some London Society of the Sciences, or whatever, and giving reports on observations, a history investigation, not a theoretical, not a science, just what has happened. Close to the empirical, but even, let's say, even less a science than was the work of the empiric, which is to say, the doctor in the Greek, from the Greek point of view, somebody who just knows if you give them this, they get better, but doesn't understand why. What does it mean? So the other side of history would then be the gentleman in leisure, freed from necessity, decides on his own, okay, I'm going to do some investigations into the human things, into the political things, into the habits. So we have that also, as I mentioned in the brief piece on Substack. You have that from Gibbon, no, excuse me, the other way around, from Herodotus to Gibbon, you have this sort of gentleman's history. What does it mean when history becomes part of a forced necessity based on sustaining life, which is the process of taking up a career in the liberal society? So that's a question I open up. And I think Butterfield, who I would put alongside the British philosopher who Strauss has studied. I would say he's this philosopher who isn't a great philosopher, who Strauss has studied the most thoroughly, Collingwood. And say also Butterfield is not a great philosopher, but he gives you a lot to bounce off. And seems to have raised this question: what does it mean to study history as a science? These are from the point of view of Plato or Aristotle. This is impossible because in Aristotle, of course, famously, you go from history, the things that merely happen at random, to poetry, which is you take some trope. You take a trope like, say, the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, understood as any parent sending their kid to war with the possible chance that the knife, the order to cut the throat, will be revoked at the nth hour. You take something that's happening all the time and turn it into an essential trope in poetry. But basically history is just raw data, which has no meaning. But what does it mean to treat the raw data all the time as scientific data that supposedly has a meaning in the sense that it's of some use to human beings? Um, Otherwise, why would we have people who are doing the job of historian unless it's mere entertainment? Excuse me. So you have Butterfield. I think that's the essence of this book of the so-called Whig history, is that he wants to say what is, if we put it in high terms, what is the piety of history? What is the thing which, if we look at it in the most serious sense, we would say this is the way, this is how history should be used, and this is where it's a real use, and this is where it's not just either ammunition for factions, which amounts to saying being used to persuade people in order to gain power, or just entertainment.